He was a shadow in the gold-lit ballroom, a man made of whispers and warnings. They called him the Cruel Duke, a war-scarred recluse who devoured fortunes and crushed souls. Every debutante, every chaperone, every hopeful mother looked through him, terrified to meet his gaze. But tonight, one girl, Seraphina Cavendish, was out of hope. Her family was on the brink of ruin, and the charming man who offered salvation was a gilded cage. In one moment of desperate, terrible clarity, Seraphina did the unthinkable. She broke from the crowd, her heart a drum against her ribs, and walked straight toward the monster. The ballroom at Devonshire House was a sea of glittering diamonds and suffocating perfume. For most, it was the pinnacle of the London season. For Seraphina Cavendish, it was a gilded execution block. She stood beside her mother, her smile stretched so tightly she feared it might crack. Every rustle of her silk gown, a gown 2 seasons old, cleverly refashioned by her own hands, was a reminder of their precarious position. Her father, Mr. Henry Cavendish, had done the unforgivable. He had gambled away their name, not just their fortune, but the trust and credit associated with a lineage that had once stood proud. Now they were pariahs, invited only out of a lingering sense of pity, or perhaps as a morbid spectacle. "You must smile, Seraphina," her mother whispered, her fan fluttering like a trapped bird. "Lord Thorne is watching." Seraphina's gaze drifted to the man in question. Lord Marcus Thorne. He was everything a debutante was supposed to desire, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with a smile that could charm a snake. He was also, Seraphina knew, the man who held her father's gambling markers. He was their only hope for salvation, and the price he hinted at was Seraphina herself. She watched him laugh, surrounded by a gaggle of admirers. He hadn't asked her to dance. Not once. He was toying with them, letting their desperation ripen, letting the ton see just how far the Cavendishes had fallen. Her stomach churned. This wasn't salvation. It was ownership. Then the orchestra seemed to falter. A hush fell over the room, a wave of cold air cutting through the heat. He had arrived. Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Rothaven, stood in the arched doorway. He was not a large man, but he commanded space. He wore severe black, a stark column in the sea of pastels and jewel tones. His reputation preceded him like an outrider. The Cruel Duke, they called him. Rothaven the Ruthless. Whispers said he'd made his vast fortune by foreclosing on the weak, that his own family estate was run like a military encampment with no room for joy. And then there was his face. The left side was aristocratic perfection, a strong jaw and a sharp, intelligent eye. The right was a roadmap of pain. A long, jagged scar, poorly healed, ran from his temple, across his cheekbone, and disappeared into his collar. A relic from the war, they said. It pulled at the corner of his eye and his mouth, giving him a permanent, unnerving sneer. He didn't mingle. He didn't bow. He simply moved to a shadowed alcove, a glass of brandy appearing in his hand, as if by magic, and he watched. "Ghastly," Seraphina's mother murmured, shielding her eyes. "To show himself in polite society, it's an affront." Seraphina said nothing. She watched him too. He was not a part of their world. He was an observer, a predator on the edges of the herd. He made no pretense of enjoying himself, his gaze sweeping the room with a cold, analytical disinterest. It was a gaze that missed nothing. Her attention was torn away by a low, desperate sound. "Seraphina, my dear." It was her father. He was pale, his cravat askew. Behind him stood 2 grim-faced men in drab suits. They were not guests. They were creditors. One of them, a Mr. Finch, spoke just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Mr. Cavendish, a word outside. Your creditors grow impatient. We were told you would have a solution tonight." The blood drained from Serafina's face. Here? They were accosting him here? The humiliation was absolute. People were turning, whispering, their fans now hiding smirks, not modesty. "Now see here," her father blustered. "This is hardly the place." "It is the only place," Finch countered, "as you have not been at your home for a week." Suddenly, a smooth, charming voice cut through the tension. Gentlemen, surely this can wait." Lord Marcus Thorne stepped in, placing a proprietary hand on Mr. Cavendish's shoulder. He smiled at the creditors, a smile of pure, condescending power. "Mr. Cavendish is an associate of mine. Perhaps his accounts can be settled through my man of business in the morning. A momentary lapse, I am sure." Mr. Finch, seeing the richest eligible bachelor in London, suddenly became obsequious. "My Lord Thorne? Of course. We meant no disrespect. Tomorrow, then." The men bowed and melted back into the shadows. Her father looked nauseatingly relieved. "My lord, I am in your debt." "Think nothing of it, Henry," Thorne said, his voice carrying. He then turned his brilliant blue eyes on Serafina. "A family must stick together, must it not?" His gaze lingered, possessive and triumphant. He had just bought them. He had just demonstrated, in front of the entire ton, that Serafina Cavendish was his property, to be rescued and claimed. Serafina felt bile rise in her throat. She looked from Thorne's perfect, smiling face to her father's weak gratitude, to her mother's desperate relief. She was trapped. She was a prize in a transaction, a lamb sold to stop the wolves. Her eyes fled across the room, seeking escape, and they landed on the one person who wasn't part of this charade. The Duke of Rothaven. He was still in his alcove, but he was no longer surveying the room. His dark, unsettling gaze was fixed, with terrifying precision, directly on her. He had seen it all. The creditors, the rescue, the silent, sickening transaction. And for the first time, Serafina didn't see coldness in his eyes. She saw recognition, as if he too knew exactly what a gilded cage looked like. The orchestra struck up a new waltz. Lord Thorne, having performed his chivalrous duty, preened. He bowed to Serafina, the very picture of a saviour. "Miss Cavendish, now that the unpleasantness is dealt with," he murmured, his voice a silken purr, "I believe you owe me a dance." It was not a request. It was a command, a down payment. Serafina looked at his outstretched hand. Behind him, her mother was nodding frantically, her eyes pleading, "Take it! Save us! Be grateful." Serafina felt a sudden, icy calm settle over her. She had been raised to be dutiful, to be polite, to be a commodity. But in this moment, looking at the man who had just publicly staked his claim on her, something inside her snapped. She would not be paraded as his latest acquisition. Not like this. "Forgive me, Lord Thorne," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the small bubble of silence around them. "But I fear I am indisposed." Thorne's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine shock in his eyes. "Indisposed? My dear, you look perfectly well." "A headache, my lord. The heat of the room," she lied, pressing her fingers to her temple. "I believe I must find a seat. Please excuse me." Before he could protest, before her mother could hiss her name, Serafina turned and walked away. She didn't walk toward the retiring room. She didn't walk toward the lemonade table. She walked, with a purpose that felt both insane and liberating, straight across the polished floor. The ton watched. They had seen her accosted by creditors, saved by Thorne, and now they watched her snub him. It was a scandal unfolding in real time, Where was she going? Serafina didn't slow. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but her steps were even. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes. She felt Lord Thorn's gaze, which she knew would be murderous. She felt her mother's, which would be horrified. She stopped directly in front of the shadowed alcove. The Duke of Rothaven looked up. He hadn't moved. He was exactly as she had left him, a pillar of darkness. Up close, the scar was more pronounced, a violent slash of white and red against his pale skin. His eyes, one dark brown, one slightly hazed by the injury, were unnervingly intelligent. He said nothing. He simply waited. The ballroom was utterly silent. The orchestra, sensing a moment of profound social import, trailed off into a confused silence. Serafina curtsied. It was a deep, flawless gesture. "Your Grace," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. The Duke inclined his head, a bare millimetre of movement. "You seem to be the only other person in this room," Serafina continued, her voice gaining strength, "who finds this suffocating." A flicker of something, surprise, amusement, passed over his stern features. "I am not known for my love of crowds, Miss Cavendish." His voice was low, a rough gravel that was oddly pleasant. "Nor I, it seems," she replied. "But I find I cannot bear to sit and be scrutinized any longer, and I cannot bear the thought of dancing with a man I dislike." This was it, the precipice. "So I came to a startling conclusion," she said, finally meeting his gaze squarely. "If I am to be ruined, let it be on my own terms." She held out her hand. "Your Grace, Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Rothaven, would you do me the honour of a dance?" A collective gasp echoed through the room. It was more than a breach of etiquette. It was madness. A debutante, especially a compromised one, did not approach a gentleman. She never approached the cruel Duke. The Duke stared at her outstretched hand. He looked at her face, searching for something, mockery, perhaps, or pity. He found neither. He found only a desperate, defiant honesty. Lord Thorn, recovering from his shock, began to stride towards them, his face a mask of thunder. "Serafina, what is the meaning of this? Come away from that man." But he was too late. Very slowly, the Duke of Rothaven set his brandy glass down. He ignored Thorn as if he were a fly. He looked at Serafina, and he nodded. "Miss Cavendish," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The honour is mine." He took her hand. His own was bare, warm and calloused. He led her on to the empty dance floor. He signalled the orchestra leader, who scrambled to start the music. A waltz began. As he put his hand on her waist, the entire ballroom seemed to exhale in disbelief. Lord Marcus Thorn stood frozen, his face purple with a rage he could not show. Serafina's mother looked as if she might faint. Serafina Cavendish was dancing with the cruel Duke. They were a spectacle, a fallen angel and a rumoured devil, turning in perfect time in the centre of a stunned, silent room. The Duke was an unexpectedly excellent dancer. He was precise, strong, and guided her with a confidence that left no room for error. He did not hold her too tightly, nor too loosely. It was a formal, correct, and utterly scandalous embrace. Serafina kept her eyes on his cravat. She could feel the heat of his gaze on her, but she dared not meet it. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the music and the furious, frantic whispering from the edges of the room. "You have made an enemy of Lord Thorn," the Duke said finally. His voice was low, for her ears only. "I believe he was my enemy long before tonight," Serafina replied, her voice steady. "He simply prefers to smile while he holds the knife." This, at last, made the Duke look at her with genuine interest. "You are not like the others, Miss Cavendish. They look at him and see a savior. You see a predator. I see a man who uses debt as a leash," she said, bitterness lacing her words, "and I refuse to be collared. Yet you came to me, a man they say feeds on the debts of others. Are you not simply trading one leash for another?" She finally met his eyes. The scarred side of his face was to the light, and she saw it clearly. It was not grotesque, as the gossips claimed. It was just a wound, a part of him. "I don't know what you are, Your Grace," she said honestly. "The Tun says you are cruel, but tonight you were the only one who watched my family's humiliation without a smirk. You didn't see sport. You saw the truth. The truth is a dangerous thing to see," he said, his expression unreadable. "It is more dangerous to ignore," she countered. He guided her through a complex turn. "Why did you ask me to dance, Miss Cavendish? Not for honesty, for defiance?" "Yes," she admitted. "Partly. I was desperate and I was angry. But also, I was curious. Curious. I was told you were a monster. But monsters do not look at a trapped animal with recognition. They look with hunger. When you looked at me, you did not look hungry." A muscle in his jaw tightened. He seemed to search for words, a rare occurrence for a man known for his cutting, brief pronouncements. The music began to swell to its close. "You are playing a game you cannot win, Miss Cavendish," he warned, his voice soft. "Thorn is not a man to be snubbed. He will ruin your father. Completely." "He will do that anyway," she said, a cold certainty settling in her. "He will simply own us while he does it. This—" She looked around at the staring faces. This was the only move I had left to make. The music ended. They stood a moment, separate from the rest of the world. The Duke bowed, a formal, correct gesture. "Thank you for the dance, Your Grace," Serafina said, curtsying. "The pleasure," he said, and the word sounded foreign on his lips, "was mine." He did not escort her back to her mother. That would have been too much. He simply released her hand and retreated to his alcove. The spell was broken. Serafina turned and walked, head held high, through the sea of whispers, back to her mother, who was fanning herself with a ferocity that threatened to tear the silk. "You have ruined us," her mother hissed, pulling her into a corner. "You have ruined everything. Snubbing Lord Thorn, dancing with him. We will be a laughing stock. We are finished." "We were finished before we arrived," Serafina said, her voice flat. Lord Thorn did not approach them. He was seen leaving the ballroom moments later, his face pale with fury. They left soon after, their departure a quiet, shameful affair. Serafina sat in the carriage, silent, as her mother wept, and her father stared blankly out the window, already calculating his next desperate move. Serafina felt nothing. Not triumph, not fear. Just a strange, hollow emptiness. She had acted, and now the consequences would come. The next day passed in a haze of dread. No one called. The post brought no invitations, only more bills. By afternoon, Serafina was certain. Her mother was right. She had destroyed them. Then, at 4 o'clock, a carriage arrived. It was not the garish yellow of Lord Thorn's equipage. It was a severe, immaculate black carriage, emblazoned with a crest, a raven clutching a key. Rothaven. A footman, Mr. Davies, in the Duke's livery, stepped out. He did not knock. He simply handed a thick, cream-coloured envelope to the butler. Serafina's mother snatched it. "What is this? A bill? Is he suing us?" She tore it open. It was not a bill. It was a single, stiff card. "Miss Cavendish, you left your fan. I have it at my library. You may retrieve it tomorrow at 10. Rothaven." Seraphina's mother looked confused. "Your fan? But your fan is right here." She pointed to the simple ivory fan on the side table. Seraphina's heart skipped. It was a summons, a pretext. He wanted to see her. Rothaven House was on a fashionable square, but it seemed to absorb the light around it. While other homes were bright and airy, Rothaven House was a fortress of dark stone, its windows like suspicious eyes. Seraphina, having lied to her mother about an errand to Hookham's library, presented herself at the door at precisely 10 o'clock. She was shown in not by a butler, but by the same valet who had delivered the note, Mr. Davies. He was a stern-looking man with an old sabre cut on his chin. "Miss Cavendish, His Grace is expecting you." The interior was not opulent. It was functional. Dark wood, heavy furniture, and an unnerving, echoing silence. There were no flowers, no frivolous decorations. But it was spotlessly clean. Davies led her to the library. It was the only room in the house that seemed truly alive. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, thousands of them. A fire crackled in the hearth, and in a pool of sunlight from a tall window, the Duke of Rothaven sat at a massive desk, writing in a ledger. He did not stand when she entered. He merely finished his line of script, sprinkled sand on the ink, and blew it away. "Miss Cavendish," he said, motioning to a chair. Davies melted from the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. They were alone. "Your Grace," Seraphina said, sitting on the edge of the leather chair. "You said I left my fan." He pointed with his quill to a small, exquisite fan on his desk. It was mother of pearl and lace. It was not hers. "I said a fan," he corrected, "a pretext. I find polite society relies on them." He leaned back, his chair groaning. "I do not like liars, Miss Cavendish, so I will not be one. I summoned you because your actions last night were inexplicable, and I do not like the inexplicable. What would you like explained, Your Grace? You knowingly sacrificed your family's last chance at salvation. You snubbed the man who holds your father's life in his hands, and you did so by aligning yourself with me, a man who could offer you nothing but social ruin." "Why?" Seraphina gripped her hands in her lap. "Because I will not be bought. I would rather my family go to the Fleet prison as free people than live in a palace as Lord Thorne's property." The Duke was silent for a long moment. He studied her, his gaze so intense it was almost physical. "The Fleet prison is not a romantic notion, miss. It is a wet, cold, typhus-ridden hell. You speak of things you do not understand. And you speak as if you do," she countered, stung. "I do," he said, his voice flat. "I was born there." Seraphina froze. This was not in the gossip. "What?" "My father was a brilliant man, a poet and a gambler. He died there, of jail fever, when I was 6. My mother died a year later. I was a ward of the parish, until my great-uncle, the previous duke, a man who had despised my father, found me in a workhouse. He had no other heir. So he took me, the gutter rat, and educated me." He gestured around the room. "I was taught to be a duke, but I have the memory of a debtor." Seraphina was speechless. This man, this cruel duke, understood her family's plight better than her own father. "Which brings me," the Duke continued, "to Lord Marcus Thorne." He turned the massive ledger on his desk toward her. It was open to a fresh page. "What do you know of Lord Thorne's business, Miss Cavendish?" "Only that he is wealthy, that he inherited a vast fortune. He did, and he has vastly increased it." "Tell me, how did your father fall into his debt?" "Cards," Seraphina said, ashamed. "At Thorne's private club, a game of faro. Just so. And the debt grew far faster than he could account for. Yes, he swore the markers were wrong, that the sums were inflated, but no one would believe him against Lord Thorn. Arthur nodded. He opened a drawer and pulled out another, smaller book. He slid it across the desk. This is a list of men your father played with. Mr. Silas Croft, a Mr. Bennet, a Captain Finch. I have heard my father curse those names. They are not gentlemen. They are sharps, professional cheats in Thorn's employ. They lose to Thorn to build his reputation, and they skin men like your father alive. The markers are, indeed, inflated. Forged, to be precise. Your father is not a fool, Miss Cavendish. He is a victim. Seraphina felt a dizzying wave of relief, followed by rage. But we can't prove it. It's our word against his. Exactly, Arthur said. He tapped the large ledger. This is my hobby, Miss Cavendish. Not parties, not racing. This, a ledger of Lord Thorn's finances. I have been acquiring the debts he holds, the families he has ruined, the properties he has seized. You buy their debts? I do. The Ton calls me cruel because I foreclose on properties. They are right. I am ruthless. But I am only ruthless with him. The twist. It hit Seraphina like a physical blow. You're not ruining families, she whispered, her eyes wide. You're hunting him. Thorn is a cancer, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, cold monotone. He doesn't just gamble. He preys. He finds a weakness, a desperate father, a sick wife, and he leverages it until he owns everything. He uses forgery, blackmail, and usury. And he tapped the ledger. I am building the case. Why? She asked. What did he do to you? Arthur's hand instinctively went to the scar on his face. This, he said. This was not a gift from the French at Waterloo. This was a gift from Thorn. But he was never in the army. He wasn't. But his father, the general, was, my commander, a man who sold our regiment's position to the French for a percentage of their supply train. Thorn Marcus was the one who carried the message. I caught him. I was a lowly captain then. I confronted him. His father's men held me down. And Marcus, he did this, with his dress sword, to mark me, to remind me that a gutter rat should never accuse his betters. He took a sharp breath. The general was quietly dismissed for errors in judgment. But Marcus, he inherited everything. He has been using his father's network of corruption ever in. I have been trying to dismantle it for 10 years. He finally looked at her, his eyes burning. I am very, very close, Miss Cavendish. I have tracked down the forger, Silas Croft. I have statements from 2 of the other sharps, but Thorn is careful. He keeps the original, fraudulent markers locked away. Without them, it is my word against his, and I am the cruel duke. He is the darling of the Ton. Seraphina's mind was racing. My father's markers, they would be proof. They would be the final nail, Arthur agreed. But he keeps them in a vault in his home, and he will never part with them, unless— A terrible understanding dawned on Seraphina. Unless, she said, her voice hollow, he is given what he wants in exchange, publicly, irrevocably. Arthur nodded, his face grim. He believes he can force your hand. He will demand marriage, and at the moment you say yes, he will feel secure. He will bring those markers to your father as a wedding gift, to be torn up in a grand gesture. He will not risk you, his new, perfect wife, ever discovering his crimes. So, Seraphina said, the trap closing around her, to save my family, I must agree to marry him, and to destroy him, I must also agree to marry him. It seems, Miss Cavendish, the Duke said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it, We are at an impasse. Serafina left Rothaven House with a clear head and a cold heart. The world was no longer a confusing haze of social rules and veiled threats. It was a battlefield, and she had just been shown the map. The Duke had not asked her for anything. He had not proposed an alliance. He had simply armed her with the truth, a weapon far heavier than she had ever expected to carry. When she returned home, the atmosphere was funereal. Her mother had taken to her bed with a migraine, and her father was in his study, a bottle of brandy at his elbow. "Serafina," he slurred as she entered. "It's over. Thorne's man of business was here. He's called in the notes, all of them, due in 2 days. Or he'll have you thrown in the Fleet," Serafina finished for him. He offered a way out," her father whispered, not meeting her eyes. "He was very understanding. He said, he is in love with you, Sarah. That if you agree to become his wife, he will forgive the debt entirely, as a wedding present to me." Serafina looked at her father, a man broken not by poverty, but by his own weakness. "And you told him I would agree, didn't you? What choice did we have?" he cried, his voice cracking. "He'll destroy us. It's a good match, Sarah. He's rich, he's powerful, he's charming." "He is a monster, father," Serafina said, her voice void of emotion. "You'll be a lady, a viscountess. What does it matter what he is?" Serafina walked out of the study. She went to her room and sat at her small writing desk. She knew what she had to do. The Duke had shown her the trap, but he had also, inadvertently, shown her the bait. She took out a sheet of her best stationery. "Lord Thorne, my father has relayed your generous offer. I have considered it. I have been foolish. I was overwhelmed at the ball. Please forgive my rudeness. I would be honored to discuss it with you. You may call on me tomorrow at noon. S. Cavendish." She sent the note. The next 24 hours were the longest of her life. At precisely noon, Lord Marcus Thorne's carriage arrived. He was shown into their parlour, the one room they still kept presentable. He was all charm and contrition. "My dear Miss Cavendish, Serafina, I fear I was too." "Forward," he said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. His touch made her skin crawl. "Your father's predicament. It made me bold. I only wish to protect you, to protect your family." "You are very kind, my lord," Serafina said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Then you will accept? You will make me the happiest of men?" I will," she whispered, lowering her gaze. "On one condition." Thorne's eyes narrowed, just slightly. "A condition? My dear, you are hardly in a position to—" "I want the engagement to be announced immediately," she said, cutting him off. "At a ball. I want the entire ton to be there. I want them to see that I am not a ruined woman, but your chosen bride. I want them to see you save my father." This appealed to his vanity. Thorne's smile returned, wider than before. He loved a grand gesture. "Of course," he said. "A brilliant idea. A ball this week. At my expense, naturally, at your father's house. A symbol of our new union. And," Serafina added, "I want the unpleasantness dealt with, publicly. I want you to bring my father's markers to the ball. I want to see you tear them up. I want everyone to know that my father is free, and that you are his savior." Thorne studied her. He was looking for the trap, but he saw only a desperate girl's pride, a demand to have her family's name publicly cleared. It was exactly what a proud, vanquished woman would ask for. "An excellent, excellent notion," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "It shall be done. At the ball, I will announce our engagement, and I will personally cancel your father's debt. The entire world will see my devotion." He kissed her hand again. "You have made me a very happy man, Serafina." As he left, Serafina ran to the wash basin and scrubbed her hand until it was raw. She had 2 days. She penned another, more urgent note. This one was not taken by a butler. Serafina slipped out of the house herself and paid a street urchin to deliver it, not to the front door of Rothaven House, but to the servants' entrance, with the instruction that it be given only to Mr. Davies. "Your Grace, the trap is set." He has agreed. An engagement ball, here, in 2 days. He will bring the markers. He intends to tear them up after the announcement. He will not tear them up? Yes. She did not receive a reply. She did not expect one. She had baited the trap. Now she could only pray the hunter was ready. The night of the engagement ball, the Cavendish house was ablaze with light, a grotesque parody of its former glory. Lord Thorn had spared no expense. Champagne flowed, an orchestra played, and the rooms were dripping with flowers that failed to mask the scent of desperation. The ton had turned out in force, drawn by the scent of scandal and the promise of a dramatic conclusion. They were here to see Serafina Cavendish, the girl who had dared to dance with the cruel Duke, finally brought to heel by the charming Lord Thorn. Serafina stood beside Thorn, her hand resting on his arm. She wore a stunning new gown of white silk, a gift from her fiancé. She felt like a sacrificial offering. Thorn was triumphant, accepting congratulations, his blue eyes glittering with possessive pride. "You see, my dear," he whispered in her ear, his breath warm and repulsive. "This is so much better than ruin. You are the envy of every woman here." "You are too kind, my lord," Serafina murmured, her gaze scanning the doorway. He wasn't here. Her father was circulating, drunk on relief and expensive champagne, clapping men on the back who had cut him dead a week prior. Her mother was weeping tears of genuine ecstatic joy. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thorn called, tapping a glass for silence. The music stopped. A hush fell. "Your attention, please." Serafina's heart hammered. It was time. "Where is he?" "Tonight," Thorn began, beaming, "is a night of new beginnings. We all know my dear friend Henry Cavendish has fallen on hard times. We are all, as gentlemen, susceptible to a run of bad luck." He paused for sympathetic laughter. "But a man's worth is not in his purse, but in his family, and in his friends." He raised his glass. "And I am proud to call Henry my friend, and soon, my father." A wave of polite oohs and ahs. "Which brings me," Thorn continued, "to my true joy. I have here." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a sheaf of papers. Serafina's heart stopped. The markers. Some unfortunate bits of paper. Debts of a truly staggering amount. He held them up. "And I have here." He reached for Serafina's hand. "The woman who has shown me that love is the only true currency." He pulled her to him. "Miss Serafina Cavendish has done me the profound honor of agreeing to be my wife." A spatter of applause. Serafina felt her stomach clench. "He's going to burn them. He's going to burn them, and I'll have no proof." "And as my first act as her intended," Thorn proclaimed, "I will destroy these symbols of debt, a toast to a clean slate." He moved toward the fireplace, where the fire was roaring. "No," Serafina said. Too loudly. Thorn paused, annoyed. "My dear." Don't burn them," she improvised, her mind racing. "Give them to my father. Let him have the pleasure of throwing them in the fire. It is his burden to release." Thorn, caught in his own performance, could not refuse such a touching request. He smiled, magnanimous. Of course. How thoughtful. Henry, my friend. He handed the sheaf of papers to Mr. Cavendish, who was weeping openly. To you, sir. The last of your troubles. Her father stumbled toward the fire, holding the papers aloft. I would not do that, Mr. Cavendish. The voice was not loud. It was a low, gravelly command, and it cut through the room like a razor. The crowd parted. Arthur Blackwood, the Duke of Rothaven, stood in the doorway. He was not in his usual, severe black. He was in his full-dress military uniform, the scarlet coat stretched taut over his powerful shoulders. Medals, real ones, earned for valor, not purchase, were pinned to his chest. His scar in the bright light looked less like a flaw and more like a warning. He was not a shadow. He was a reckoning. Thorn's face went white. Rothaven, you are not welcome here. This is a private— I am not here as a guest, Arthur said, taking a step into the room. His valet, Mr. Davies, stood behind him, along with 2 other men. Grim men. Bow Street runners. Mr. Cavendish, Arthur commanded, his voice ringing with authority. Do not burn those papers. They are not debts. They are evidence. What is the meaning of this? Thorn roared, his charm evaporating, revealing the snake beneath. This is slander. Seize him. No one moved. Evidence, Arthur continued, his gaze locked on Thorn, of fraud, of conspiracy, and of forgery. He nodded to Mr. Davies. Please retrieve the markers. Mr. Cavendish, you will be compensated for them. Mr. Cavendish, thoroughly terrified, simply handed the papers to Davies, who passed them to one of the Bow Street men. You have no proof, Thorn spat. I have the sworn testimony of Mr. Silas Croft, Arthur said calmly. A very talented forger, currently in the custody of Bow Street. He has confessed in detail how you employed him to inflate the markers of your friends, including these. The crowd gasped. I also have, Arthur continued, the testimonies of Mr. Bennet and Captain Finch, your card sharps. They too have been most forthcoming in exchange for a lighter sentence. Thorn looked around, trapped. Lies, all lies. He is a ruined madman. He attacked me years ago. I have a different recollection, Lord Thorn, Arthur said, as does the officer I served under, who is now General Sir Robert Peel. He was very interested to read my full account of your father's errors in judgment. The mention of Peel's name, the most powerful man in London, was the final blow. Thorn was finished. You set me up, Thorn hissed, his eyes finding Seraphina. This was you. He lunged for her, his face a mask of pure hatred. You wretched little— He never finished the sentence. Arthur moved with a speed that was terrifying. In one motion, he crossed the space, and his fist connected with Thorn's jaw. It was not a gentleman's slap. It was a soldier's punch. Thorn crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The room was in absolute shock. The Duke of Rothaven stood over the fallen man, breathing heavily. He straightened his uniform jacket. Mr. Harris, he said to the lead Bow Street runner, he is all yours. The runners hauled the unconscious Lord Thorn to his feet and dragged him from the room. The cruel Duke had just saved them all. The sound of Lord Marcus Thorn's body being unceremoniously hauled from the ballroom was a vulgar, scraping noise that tore through the fabric of the night. It was followed by a silence so absolute, so heavy, that Seraphina could hear the sizzle of a candle wick 6 feet away. The air, once filled with music and laughter, was now a vacuum, thick with shock and the metallic tang of fear. Then the whispers started. They were not the light, titillating whispers of gossip. This was a new sound, a low, agitated buzzing. Men who moments before had been congratulating Thorn were now clustered in tight, furious knots. My God, forgery. He had him arrested, in the middle of a ball. I lost my wife's inheritance at Thorne's club. I always suspected. The Duke struck him, an act of war. Serafina's gaze found her family. They were the eye of the storm. Her mother had slumped into a gilt chair, her face a mask of waxy horror. Ruined, she breathed, her fan fluttering weakly. He struck a viscount. Oh, Serafina, he's a brute. He's ruined us. Again. Her mother's mind, incapable of processing the rescue, could only see the scandal. The wealthy suitor was gone, replaced by violence and public shame. But her father was another matter entirely. He was still on the floor, but he was no longer a drunken fool. He was achingly, terrifyingly sober. He had crawled to where the Bow Street runner had dropped one of the markers. His hand, shaking violently, held it up to the firelight. 800, he whispered, his voice cracking. 800 pounds. He stared at the paper, tears of pure, agonizing vindication streaming down his face. I knew it. I told them all. I wasn't that drunk. I wasn't that mad. He had been weak, yes, a fool, certainly. But he had not been a liar. His ruin had been a hunt, not just a fall. He looked up at his daughter, his eyes filled with a new, horrifying respect. "Sarah!" he choked out. "My girl! What have you done?" Serafina had no answer for him. Her gaze was locked on the man in the doorway. Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Rothaven, stood alone. His duty was done. The scarlet of his uniform, which had been a symbol of authority, now made him a target. He was a pariah in his moment of victory. He had broken their world, and they would never forgive him for it. He braced himself, his face settling back into the cold, impassive mask of the cruel Duke. He had won his war, and now, as always, he would retreat to his fortress. He turned to leave. "Your Grace." Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a saber. Arthur stopped. He turned back. His face was unreadable, his one good eye dark. He had already begun to rebuild his walls. Serafina began to walk. This was the second time she had crossed a ballroom for him. The first had been an act of desperate, social suicide. This time was different. She was not running from anything. She was walking toward her future. The crowd parted for her as they had for him, a sea of shocked, staring faces. She felt their eyes on her, but for the first time in her life, she was not a commodity being inspected. She was a woman who had chosen. She stopped a few feet from him. "You came," she said, her voice breathless. "I keep my word, Miss Cavendish," he replied. His voice was formal, curt. He was the Duke of Rothaven, closing a transaction. "You saved my father. You saved me." His gaze swept the chaotic room. "I am not certain 'saved' is the word they would use," he said, his voice laced with a familiar cynicism. "I have just destroyed your reputation. You are now the woman whose engagement ball ended with her fiancé being arrested at the behest of the cruel Duke. You are as much a pariah as I am." "You revealed the truth," she insisted. A truth no one here wanted to see. He countered. He inclined his head, a gesture of dismissal. "But my work is done. You are safe from Thorne." He was about to turn again, to leave her to this new, ruined life he had created. "And what of our arrangement?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He paused. "There is no arrangement. I have seen to the matter. Thorne's assets are seized by the Crown. However, I took the liberty of purchasing your father's true notes from the club's ledgers. Before this evening." Shame, hot and familiar, washed over her. "But we cannot pay you. We have nothing." "The sum," Arthur said, his voice flat. is £800, not 80,000. Serafina stared. The difference was astronomical. It was the price of a few bad nights, not a lifetime of ruin. Your father, the Duke continued, is a fool, but he is not a degenerate. I have instructed my man of business to arrange a payment schedule with your father's solicitor. 10 years. I will not press the matter. He looked at her, his gaze intense. You are free. He has no hold over you. No one does. He said it like a judgment. You are free. It was the one thing she had craved. He was giving it to her. He had solved her problem and was now erasing himself from her life. His ledger balanced. She looked at this man, this complicated, scarred, and terribly lonely man. He had given her back her life, and he was about to walk out of it, leaving her with what? A negligible debt and a ruined reputation. So that is it, she said, and she was shocked by the sudden, cold anger in her voice. You give me my freedom and you just walk away. You go back to Rothaven House, back to your shadows, back to your ledgers. His face tightened. That is my life, Miss Cavendish. It is what I am. Is it? She challenged, taking a step closer. The tongue was straining to hear. You are the man who spent 10 years hunting a monster. You are the man who was born in the Fleet prison and became a duke. You are the man who looked at me in that ballroom and saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. That is not just a man who balances ledgers. He was breathing faster now. She was striking at the very foundations of the fortress he had built around himself. Your war is over, Arthur, she said, her voice softening. What will you do now? He looked lost, genuinely, achingly lost. I do not know, he admitted. He gestured to the stunned crowd. They will not forgive this. I will be more of a pariah than ever. And you? She asked. Will you forgive them for not seeing you? She took another step. She was close now. You are not a pariah, Your Grace. You are a hero. Arthur let out a bitter scoff. I am a brute. I just struck a man in front of his intended. He looked at her pointedly. In front of you. That is not what heroes do. You struck a criminal who was lunging at me, Serafina countered, her voice fierce. A man who forged and blackmailed and lied. I will not faint because you defended me, Your Grace. I am not that girl anymore. He stared at her. This impossible woman. This co-conspirator. She looked past him, to the corner where the orchestra was huddled, packing their instruments. Maestro! Her voice rang out, clear as a bell. The musicians froze. A waltz, if you please. The maestro looked at her, then at the Duke, his eyes wide with terror. This night was a powder keg, and she was asking him to light a match. He looked at Arthur Blackwood, the most powerful, terrifying man in London. The Duke gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. The musicians scrambled back to their places. A sound, thin and hesitant, began to fill the room. A soft, slow waltz. Serafina turned back to Arthur. She did not hold out her hand. She did not curtsy. She simply waited. It was not a request. It was an invitation, a challenge. He was torn. This was not part of the plan. The plan was expose Thorn, retreat, lock the door. His life was order, numbers and solitude. This was chaos. This was emotion. This was her. They will talk, he said, his voice a low gravel. Let them, she replied. They were talking anyway. At least now they will be telling the truth. And what is the truth, Serafina? He asked, using her name deliberately. She smiled, a small, slow, brave smile. That he was known as the cruel Duke, until she dared to dance with him. That was it. The final blow to his defences. He looked down at his scarlet uniform, the symbol of his war, his rank, his isolation. Very slowly he reached up and unbuckled the heavy, formal sword belt from his waist. He let it drop to the floor. The thud of the weapon hitting the polished wood was deafening. A collective gasp rose from the room. He was unarmed. Then he peeled off his white dress gloves, one finger at a time, revealing the calloused, warm, real hands she remembered. He stepped forward, closing the last bit of space between them. "Serafina," he said, and her name sounded rough, unused, as if he were speaking a foreign language. I do not know how. Not like this. Not without a war to fight." "Then I will teach you," she whispered. She placed her hand in his. "It is just like the last time. Only this time we are not hiding." He put his hand on her waist, and this time it was not the formal, correct embrace of their first dance. He pulled her close. His hand was firm, strong, possessive. It was not the hold of a partner. It was the hold of an anchor. As they began to move, the orchestra, seeing this unbelievable, legendary sight, gained confidence. The music swelled, becoming richer, sweeping, romantic. Serafina closed her eyes. She leaned her head just slightly, daringly, toward his shoulder. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart through the thick wool of his coat. He smelled of old books, clean linen, and something uniquely, indefinably Arthur. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't ruined. She had never, in her entire life, felt so safe. Arthur held her as if she were the only real thing in the room. He felt her, light but solid, in his arms. He had held ledgers. He had held weapons. He had held the weight of a 10-year vengeance. He had never held this. Hope. It was a terrifying, brilliant sensation. He felt the familiar pull of the scar on his face and braced for her to flinch away from it. She didn't. She leaned in. He looked over her head and saw the ton watching, but their whispers had stopped. They were simply staring. They were witnessing the birth of a legend. The cruel duke and the fallen debutante were not falling. They were rising. "My house is very quiet," Arthur murmured into her hair. Serafina tilted her head back to look at him. "I know. I have a library of 10,000 books," he continued, his voice low and intense, "and no one to read them with." "I am a very fast reader," she replied, her eyes shining. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a hesitant, rusty expression, but it transformed him. The scar did not look like a sneer. It did not look cruel. It just looked like him. "Serafina Cavendish," he said, his voice full of a feeling he couldn't yet name. "You are a terrible, disruptive, and inexplicably brave woman." "And you, Arthur Blackwood," she said, her hand tightening on his shoulder, "are a good man who has been hiding behind a bad reputation for far too long." "I suppose," he said, his smile widening, "we shall have to find a new one. Together." He stopped dancing, though he did not release her. They stood in the center of the room, the music swelling around them. He lifted her hand, the one he held, and he turned it over. He lowered his head and pressed his lips to her palm. It was not the simpering, possessive kiss of Lord Thorne. It was a deep, reverent and binding gesture. It was not a down payment. It was a promise. And as the entire London ton watched, the cruel Duke, at last, began his life. And that is where our story ends. Not with a perfect fairy tale wedding, but with something far more real. A dance. A dance between two people who had been judged, scarred, and underestimated, and who found in each other the one person who saw the truth. They proved that true strength isn't about having a perfect reputation. It's about having the courage to unmask the real villains, even when they're the most charming people in the room. What do you think happened to Seraphina and Arthur? Did they build a new life together, far from the whispers of the ton? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by their story, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps this channel. And if you love stories about hidden truths and dramatic twists, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the real-life drama we have coming up next. Thank you for listening.